I want you to picture the most ubiquitous T-shirt graphic in the entire world. Like, you know the exact what I'm talking about, right?
Oh, absolutely. The high contrast one.
Yeah, that stark two-tone image of a bearded man. He's staring really intensely into the distance, wearing a beret with a single star on it.
Right, right.
You literally see this face everywhere. I mean, it's on college campuses, it's plastered on protest banners, printed on coffee mugs, and bizarrely enough, even on bikinis.
Yeah, which is just wild.
It really is. But, you know, if you were to stop someone on the street wearing that shirt and just ask them, hey, who is the actual man behind that logo? You'd probably just get a pretty blank stare.
You definitely would. It's
Uh,
it's actually one of the strangest phenomena in modern history, I think.
Yo, for sure.
That single image has been completely flattened into this universal, almost meaningless shorthand for just general rebellion. The real human being beneath that pop art poster, with all his intense complexities, his intellect, and frankly, his capacity for extreme violence,
Huh.
has been totally buried by his own mythology.
And digging up that real human being is exactly our mission for today's deep dive. We're taking a massive, really comprehensive biographical document that you've shared with us, and we're using it to cut straight through that heavy mythology.
Right, getting to the actual fact.
Exactly. We are going to chart the journey of Ernesto Che Guevara from a severe asthmatic, upper-class Argentine medical student all the way to a global revolutionary icon.
It's quite a journey.
It really is. But hey, before we begin, we need to make something very clear to you, the listener. Our source material contains highly politically charged content with strong left-wing and right-wing perspectives.
Very strong perspectives on both sides, yeah.
Right, and we are not taking any sides here. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the content, nor are we judging them. Our goal is simply to impartially convey the ideas and historical facts contained in the original source material so you can understand the full picture.
Absolutely. Because, if you genuinely want to understand how a person becomes a revolutionary, you can't just look at the wars they fought.
No, of course not.
You have to examine the world that formed their baseline reality. And in the case of Ernesto Guevara, who was born in 1928 in Argentina, that baseline was built on some serious contradictions.
Like what?
Well, he came from an upper-class family with Irish and Basque ancestry. His father actually used to boast that the blood of Irish rebels flowed in his son's veins.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but physically. He was incredibly frail. He suffered from severe, lifelong asthma.
Okay, let's unpack this because I always pictured him as this rugged, indestructible jungle fighter.
Yeah.
But reading the source material, the asthma was genuinely debilitating.
Oh, entirely.
Like, he actually wanted to sell insecticides as a young man. He even built a whole chemistry lab in his family's garage, but he had to completely abandon it because the chemical fumes just kept triggering these acute asthma attacks.
Right, as a constant shadow over his life.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is his response to it, which is very telling about his psychology.
How so?
He just completely refused to let his lungs dictate his reality. He pushed himself athletically to the absolute extreme.
Yeah, the sources say he played golf, he swam.
But he was most passionate about rugby, and he played with such an aggressive, almost reckless style on the pitch that his teammates gave him the nickname Fuser.
Fuser, right.
Yeah, it was a mashup of El Furibundo, which means furious, and his mother's maiden name, De La Serna.
So we have this furious rugby player, but what really stood out to me is that he was also this massive intellectual sponge.
Oh, a total bookworm.
Yeah. His family's home had this 3,000-book library, and he read practically all of it. We were talking Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, Jules Verne, poetry by Walt Whitman, and Pablo Neruda.
The range is incredible.
It is. He could apparently recite Rudyard Kipling's poem If entirely from memory. So he's athletic, well-read, upper class, and he decides to study medicine at the University of Buenos Aires.
Right.
But then, in 1952, he does something that completely derails his life's trajectory. He takes a year off for a motorcycle journey across South America with his friend Alberto Granado.
And this is the turning point.
Exactly. I mean, I think of this trip like a modern university student's gap year backpacking trip, right?
Yeah, totally.
You know the cliche, someone goes backpacking through Europe or Asia to find themselves? But instead of just finding himself on a beach somewhere, Guevara finds a systemic nightmare.
He really does.
He witnesses staggering poverty. He spends time treating patients at a remote leper colony on the Amazon River. He goes to the Anaconda copper mine in Chile and meets these persecuted, freezing miners working in horrific conditions.
Yeah, and the psychological shift that happens on this road trip is the crux of his entire story. He started this journey with a very traditional medical mindset.
Meaning he just wanted to cure diseases and save individual lives.
Exactly. But as he traveled, the sheer scale of the suffering completely overwhelmed that goal. I mean, he wrote later about sitting next to a sick child, completely unable to provide treatment just because the family had no money.
God, that's heartbreaking.
It really is. He watched exhausted fathers treat the death of a son as just an unimportant accident because they were so ground down by the daily struggle to survive.
So he essentially stops looking at poverty as a symptom and starts viewing it as a disease itself, right?
Exactly. The medical framing is crucial here. He basically diagnoses the entire continent. He concludes that Latin America is not a collection of separate independent nations with their own unique problems, but one single exploited entity.
Right.
And in his mind, treating individual patients was like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. He became absolutely convinced that to save the masses, he had to completely abandon medicine and embrace a violent, armed political struggle against capitalist exploitation.
I mean, that is a massive leap, going from I want to heal people to I need to start a violent revolution.
It's huge.
And that theoretical anger turns into brutal reality very quickly. He actually graduates from medical school, but instead of opening a clinic, he travels to Guatemala.
Right.
And this is where he sees the geopolitical machine in action. He watches the CIA back a coup that overthrows Guatemala's democratically elected president, Jacobo Arbenz.
Yeah, and our sources note this coup was primarily executed to protect the massive land interests of the American-owned United Fruit Company.
Exactly. So Guevara is marked for murder by the new military regime, and he's forced to flee to Mexico. And that retreat to Mexico is where history pivots, because that is where he meets Fidel and Raul Castro.
Yes, and the Castros were exiled Cubans who were actively plotting to overthrow the U.S.-backed dictator of Cuba, Fulgencio Batista.
And Guevara just instantly aligns with them.
Instantly. So in 1956, this ragtag group boards a leaky, wildly overcrowded cabin cruiser called the Grandma and sails for Cuba.
Hold on. I need to stop you there because the logistics of this are just insane to me. They're launching a national revolution from a leaky yacht. Like, how many people were even on this boat?
82 men, packed onto a boat designed for maybe a dozen. It was a tactical disaster from the second they launched. I mean, as soon as they landed on the Cuban coast, they were ambushed by Batista's military. Most of the 82 men were immediately killed or executed.
So the revolution almost died on day one.
Pretty much. Only 22 of them managed to escape and regroup in the dense jungle of the Sierra Maestra Mountains.
And during that horrific first ambush, there's a moment that feels almost too symbolic to be real, but it actually happened.
Oh, the medical kit.
Yes. As they are fleeing into the tree line under heavy fire, Guevara has a choice. He is carrying his heavy medical supplies, and he sees a box of ammunition dropped by a fleeing comrade.
Right.
And he physically drops the medical kit so he can carry the bullets. The doctor literally drops the medicine for the gun.
It's such a striking image.
It really is. And from that moment on, he is a guerrilla commander.
And an incredibly severe one at that.
Yeah.
This is where the dichotomy of his character really emerges.
Yeah, explain that.
Well, on one hand, he's deeply invested in the peasantry. He builds makeshift schools and clinics in the mountains. During breaks in the fighting, he's personally teaching illiterate soldiers how to read.
Right.
But simultaneously, he became a notoriously harsh, unforgiving disciplinarian.
Yeah, our sources mention he was totally ruthless toward deserters and informants. Like, there's a specific execution detailed in the material, a peasant named Eutimio Guerra.
Right, Guevara.
Guerra had acted as a guide for the rebels, but supposedly accepted 10,000 pesos to give their coordinates to Batista's Air Force.
And instead of delegating the execution, Guevara stepped forward and shot Guerra himself. And what stands out isn't just the act, but how he documented it.
Oh, the diary entry.
Yeah. In his personal diary, he wrote about the execution with this chilling, almost clinical detachment. He didn't write about the emotional weight of taking a life. He just noted that he ended the problem with a shot from a .32 pistol to the right side of the brain, and then described the exact exit wound in the temporal lobe.
I mean, if you're wearing that t-shirt right now, you probably think of him fighting for the underdog. You don't picture the cold medical diary entry about an execution.
No, you definitely don't.
And that brings us to the aftermath of the revolution. So after Batista flees and the war is won in 1959, Castro puts Guevara in command of the La Cabaña fortress prison.
Right.
Suddenly, this man who loved poetry is overseeing revolutionary tribunals. We are talking about dozens, possibly hundreds of firing squad executions under his direct jurisdiction.
And these were largely conducted without anything resembling due process.
Right. He even ordered the televised execution of a Batista police colonel named Rojas. The man's family was literally screaming on live television as he was shot. So what does this all mean for the listener who only knows him as a hero?
Well, this specific period at La Cabaña is where the historical debate becomes intensely, fiercely polarized. If you read the accounts of critics, particularly exiled Cuban authors like Armando Valladares, they describe Guevara during this time as a cold-blooded killing machine.
Just totally ruthless.
Yeah, a man consumed by hate with a mentality similar to Robespierre during the French Revolution's reign of terror.
But, the sources also show the other side of that argument. Supporters of the revolution argue that Batista's regime had tortured and murdered up to 20,000 Cubans.
Right.
The Cuban public was absolutely enraged and they were demanding vengeance. Those supporters view Guevara's actions not as murder, but as exacting necessary revolutionary justice against literal war criminals.
And Guevara himself felt zero remorse. He wrote a letter openly stating that the firing squads were an absolute necessity and an imposition of the will of the people.
Wow.
To him, the old society had to be violently purged before a new one could be built.
So he's literally executing people to secure this revolution. But tearing down a corrupt government with bullets is one skill set. Rebuilding a national autonomy requires a completely different toolkit, and that's where his absolute ideological purity violently collides with reality.
Oh, completely.
So Castro makes him Minister of Industries and President of the National Bank. And just to show his utter disdain for capitalist wealth, Guevara refuses to use his full name on the country's currency. He just signs the national bank notes with his nickname, Che.
Which is such a wild flex.
Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't just trying to manage an economy. He was trying to force a massive psychological evolution.
Yeah.
He championed this concept called the hombre nuevo, or the new man. Guevara believed that for socialism to actually function, fundamental human nature had to be altered.
Meaning what, exactly?
That citizens couldn't be motivated by pay raises, material wealth, or individual ambition anymore. They had to be motivated purely by a sense of moral duty, social solidarity, and self-sacrifice.
Right.
And to his credit, he led by example. He would routinely work 36-hour shifts at the government ministry, and then he'd spend his days off doing hard manual labor, like cutting sugar cane or working on construction sites.
Wait, hold on. Let's think about the mechanics of this. He seriously thought a whole nation of millions of people would just cheerfully give up their paychecks, abandon their personal ambitions, and work construction on their weekends just because he was doing it.
That was the expectation, yeah.
I mean, I liken this to a modern tech startup where the founder demands 100-hour weeks, expects employees to sleep under their desks, and offers zero bonuses because they are, changing the world.
That's a great analogy.
It sounds incredibly noble on a motivational poster, but eventually, human nature kicks in. People want to see their families. They want tangible rewards for their labor.
You've hit on exactly why the system collapsed. You can't run a national economy purely on revolutionary zeal. Guevara pushed for rapid industrialization and agricultural diversification.
Because he wanted to break Cuba's reliance on sugar, right?
Exactly. But by rushing this transition without the proper infrastructure, he completely crashed Cuba's sugar production, which was the sole engine keeping the country afloat. He essentially told the software engineers to start building hardware overnight.
Oh, man.
The result was a massive drop in productivity, skyrocketing worker absenteeism, and eventually severe food rationing across the entire island.
It's a total systemic failure. And while the economy is crashing, his rigid ideology is also causing massive geopolitical shockwaves.
Yes, especially during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right. The sources detail his involvement there, and he was absolutely uncompromising in his Marxist purity. When the Soviets finally backed down and removed their nuclear missiles from Cuba, Guevara was furious.
Furious is putting it mildly. He explicitly stated later that if the nuclear missiles had remained under Cuban control, he would have fired them.
I just want to pause on that for a second. He was actually willing to trigger a global nuclear holocaust over an ideology.
Completely. To him, imperialism was a global disease that had to be eradicated, even if millions of innocent lives were lost in the crossfire.
That is terrifying.
It is. If we connect this to the bigger picture, he viewed the Soviet compromise as a massive betrayal. He started publicly criticizing the Soviet Union, accusing them of liberalizing their economy and forgetting the core tenets of Marxism.
Which is an incredibly dangerous game to play when the Soviets are literally the only ones keeping your crashing economy alive.
Exactly.
And that friction really marks the end of his time in power. He's frustrated by the endless government bureaucracy, the failing economy, and the geopolitical chess games of the Cold War.
He realized he wasn't cut out for a desk job.
Right. He realizes that at his core, he is a guerrilla fighter, not a bank president. So in 1965, he just vanishes from public life. He writes a farewell letter to Castro, officially renouncing all his government positions and even his Cuban citizenship because he decides he needs to go export the revolution globally.
He truly believed that Africa was imperialism's weak link. So he travels in disguise to the Congo to help a group of Marxist rebels known as the Simbas.
And they were fighting against the Congolese military and Western mercenaries, right?
Right. But it was an unmitigated disaster from day one.
Why did it fail so badly, though? I mean, he literally wrote the textbook on guerrilla warfare.
Well, because guerrilla warfare requires an intimate connection with the local environment and the people. Guevara arrived expecting to find disciplined fighters ready to execute his specific tactical vision.
But that's not what he found.
Not at all. He found the rebel leadership, which actually included a young Laurent Kabila, to be corrupt, fractured, and largely undisciplined. Furthermore, Guevara didn't speak Swahili well, so he couldn't even communicate his strategies.
Oh, that's a huge problem.
On top of that, he suffered terribly from dysentery, and his asthma returned with a vengeance. And unbeknownst to him, his radio communications were being actively intercepted by a CIA listening ship anchored off the coast in the Indian Ocean.
Wow, they were totally compromised.
Completely. He barely survived the campaign and left Africa deeply disheartened. He actually began his Diary of the Congo expedition with the sentence, "This is the story of a failure."
That's rough. But he doesn't quit. After hiding out in Europe to recover, he decides to try again. This time, he targets South America, specifically Bolivia.
Right.
And the lengths he went to for his disguise are wild. I mean, this is one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. To sneak into Bolivia, he shaved off his famous beard, shaved the top of his head to look naturally balding, dyed the rest of his hair gray, and wore these thick, heavy glasses.
It was a very thorough disguise.
Yeah. He entered the country posing as a middle-aged, conservative Uruguayan businessman named Adolfo Mena Gonzalez.
It was brilliant, but the Bolivian campaign was doomed structurally before it even began. You mentioned earlier that he wrote the textbook on guerrilla warfare.
Yeah.
Well, his core philosophy, known as the FOCO theory, argued that a small, highly dedicated vanguard could ignite a massive peasant uprising. But he completely misread the local conditions in Bolivia.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. This is where the irony gets staggering. He assumes he's going to roll into Bolivia and fight the same poorly trained, unmotivated armies he fought in Cuba.
Exactly. But the entire landscape of the Cold War had shifted dramatically because of his success in Cuba. The United States government was absolutely not going to be caught off guard in their own backyard again.
Right.
The Bolivian army he faced wasn't a ragtag militia. They were being actively trained, supplied, and advised by elite U.S. Army Special Forces and CIA operatives.
So his own massive success in Cuba actually tipped off his enemies. He built the playbook, and then the U.S. military read it and engineered the perfect counter-strategy.
That's exactly what happened.
Plus, everything that could go wrong on the ground did. His shortwave radio transmitters broke, leaving him completely cut off from Havana. He couldn't coordinate resupplies.
And the local Bolivian peasants, the exact people he came to liberate, were terrified of his forces.
Yeah, instead of joining his revolution, they reported his movements directly to the Bolivian military.
And again, we see the language barrier play a fatal role here. Guevara wrote in his diary that trying to talk to the local peasants was like talking to statues.
Why? What happened?
Well, his group had spent months learning Quechua, only to arrive in a specific region of Bolivia where the locals primarily spoke Tupi-Guarani. He couldn't even communicate his revolutionary ideas to them. As the French intellectual Regis Debray later put it, Guevara was eaten by the jungle.
Eaten by the jungle. It's such a tragic misalignment of theory and reality, and it all culminates on October 8, 1967.
Right.
An informant gives up their location in the Euro Ravine. Bolivian special forces surround his small, starving group. Guevara is shot in the calf, his gun is rendered completely useless by an enemy bullet, and he is finally forced to surrender.
Yeah, the end of the road.
The physical descriptions of him at this moment are striking. A Bolivian helicopter pilot named Jaime Nino de Guzman saw him tied up in this dilapidated mud schoolhouse in the tiny village of La Higuera.
It was a grim scene.
Guevara's hair was matted with dirt, his clothes were shredded to rags, and his boots were gone. His feet were just wrapped in rough leather sheets. But Guzman noted that even tied up and bleeding, Che still held his head high and looked everyone dead in the eye.
He really didn't break.
No, Guzman actually felt pity for him and gave him a small pouch of pipe tobacco.
His defiance remained totally intact right to the very end. That night in the schoolhouse, a Bolivian officer tried to snatch his pipe as a souvenir, and Guevara physically kicked him against the wall.
Wow.
He even spat directly in the face of a Bolivian rear admiral who attempted to interrogate him.
And the next morning, knowing he's likely going to die, he asks to see the village school teacher, a 22-year-old woman named Julia Cortez. He points out to her that the schoolhouse is practically falling apart.
Right.
He tells her it is anti-pedagogical, practically a crime, to expect poor rural children to learn in a crumbling mud hut while government officials in the capital are driving luxury Mercedes cars. He looks at her and says, "That's what we are fighting against."
But the political machinery had already decided his fate. The Bolivian president, René Barrientos, ordered his immediate execution. They didn't want a prolonged trial that could turn into a global public spectacle, and they certainly didn't want to risk him escaping.
That makes sense.
A CIA operative on the ground, Felix Rodriguez, relayed the execution order. A 27-year-old Bolivian sergeant named Mario Terán volunteered to be the executioner.
And the sources say Terán was reportedly half drunk and seeking personal revenge because 3 of his friends had been killed in a firefight with Guevara's men just days earlier.
Right.
So Terán walks into the schoolhouse holding an M2 carbine. And Che Guevara stands up to face him and delivers his final words. He looks at the executioner and says, "I know you've come to kill me. Shoot, coward. You are only going to kill a man."
Incredible final words.
Terán hesitated, visibly shaking, and then opened fire. He shot him 9 times. And this precise moment in that mud schoolhouse is where the mortal man dies, but the immortal, untouchable icon is really born.
And it happened almost instantaneously. The Bolivian military lashed his body to the landing skids of a helicopter and flew it to the nearby town of Vallegrande. They laid his corpse out on a concrete slab in a hospital laundry room and invited the international press to take photographs. Their goal was simple. They wanted to prove to the world, definitively, that the great revolutionary was dead and defeated.
But those photographs had the exact opposite effect.
Completely backfired.
I've seen those post-mortem photos, and they look unbelievably like Renaissance paintings. The art critic John Berger famously pointed out that Che looked exactly like the dead Christ in Andrea Mantegna's famous 15th century painting.
Oh, absolutely.
His eyes were wide open, his face looked completely peaceful, almost ethereal. The military's plan to humiliate him backfired spectacularly. Local residents who filed past the body secretly clipped locks of his hair to keep as divine holy relics.
They were treating him like a saint.
Yeah. The military panicked. They actually amputated his hands to send to Argentina for fingerprint verification, and then buried his body in a secret mass grave under an airstrip specifically to prevent a shrine from being built.
But you can't bury a symbol. Within months of his death, by 1968, students in Paris, Berlin, and Chicago were rioting and protesting in the streets against the establishment, and they were carrying massive banners with his face on them.
Right, that specific photo.
Yes, specifically, they were carrying Alberto Cortez' photograph from 1960. It was a candid shot taken at a memorial service in Havana, which became known as Guerrero Heroico.
It's just so famous.
The Maryland Institute College of Art eventually called it the most famous photograph in the world. But here is the critical mechanism of how history works. In the process of becoming a universal symbol, the complex, violent reality of the actual man was entirely stripped away.
It is the ultimate historical paradox. Think about it. This was a devout, unyielding Marxist who viewed capitalism as a contest among wolves.
Right.
He abolished pay raises in Cuba. He literally wanted to eradicate the concept of money itself. And today, he is a highly commoditized, incredibly profitable global brand.
It's almost comical.
It is. You see his face mass-produced on T-shirts, hats, posters, and keychains. And it really makes you wonder, does the person wearing that shirt today know they are wearing the face of a man who oversaw televised firing squads and actively suppressed a free press?
Probably not.
Or does the shirt just mean they support a vague, romanticized, safe idea of rebellion against the system?
Well, this raises an important question, right? Because the answer entirely depends on who you ask, which is why he remains so fascinating.
Very true.
To rural Bolivian farmers, he is literally prayed to as Saint Ernesto. To the Cuban exiles who fled to Miami, he is forever the butcher of La Cabaña. To left-wing revolutionaries worldwide, he's the ultimate martyr who refused to compromise and died for his beliefs.
Yeah.
The image has completely transcended the man. It has become a blank canvas. The modern viewer simply projects whatever they want to see, whatever frustrations they have with their own lives, onto that high-contrast face.
A blank canvas that completely hides a staggeringly complicated life. And that brings us to the end of today's deep dive.
It's been quite a ride.
We have charted the incredible, highly polarizing journey of Ernesto Guevara, from a fume-filled garage laboratory in Argentina to the bloody battlefields of Cuba, the failing economic ministries in Havana, the disastrous jungles in the Congo, and finally, a mud floor in Bolivia.
Yeah.
It just proves that the actual unvarnished history of a person is infinitely more complex, much darker, and far more fascinating than a two-dimensional pop art poster.
It is a vital reminder for all of us. We live in an era of quick memes, viral images, and historical shorthand. But taking the time to look closely at the real facts, the mechanisms, and the messy realities behind the symbols we encounter every day is the best way to cultivate true critical thinking.
Absolutely. Understanding the real history behind the image is the ultimate shortcut to being truly well-informed. So I want to leave you with this final thought to mull over. If Che Guevara, a man who dedicated his entire existence and ultimately sacrificed his life in a violent quest to destroy the capitalist system, could somehow look at our world right now, if he could walk through a modern shopping mall and see a teenager buying a mass-produced, sweatshop-made t-shirt with his face printed on it for $29.99, what do you think he would say? Until next time, keep diving deep.